And welcome back into the Golf Intervention Podcast. I'm sitting here tonight with my co-host Rob Fales. We've been chit-chatting for a few minutes about all kinds of things going on in life. Cheers, Rob. He's got things.
Cheers.
He's got things going on. I've got things going on.
We all got our stuff.
We got our stuff. And I said, am I present for this tonight? Am I present? And you know what I thought?
Are we on time?
Am I on time? If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to the Raymond Pryor interview, which you should all listen to once a week anyway. Just put it back on and listen to it. So good. So rich with information. And I think the answer is, I think I'm on time right now. I wasn't, but now I am. I just had to get present there for a second. And here we are. And tonight I'm excited. This is what's getting me present, is the excitement surrounding tonight's topic, which is, like we discussed on the last episode, sort of the culmination of all the things we've discussed up until this point on the show, bringing it kind of together into a series we're calling Strategy. And the Strategy series goes through a framework, which we discussed on the last episode. So we don't always say go back and listen, but you probably should go back and listen. Yeah. Short episode, but we wanted to lay out the series and the framework of scoring strategy. Which I thought we did well. I listened to the episode. We dropped it this morning, and I listened to it twice today as I was driving around, and I liked it. And I thought that we did cover the things that I want to cover. And I'm critical of us because I want us to always be clear and concise with the information that we're giving to the listener, and as are you. So today, as we promised on the last episode, we're going to cover tee shot strategy. So tee shot strategy is going to be so fun. So we're going to go through this. We're going to talk about the overarching visual that is tee shot strategy. What does that even mean? Then we're going to break it down for you through the framework and kind of touch on the major bullet points for each level of player. And hopefully you know the level 1, 2, 3 golfer that we discuss. You kind of look at it like beginner, intermediate to really good, and then like ridiculously good golfers, right? That's kind of what we talk about. And we want to always contextualize that for the listener so that they know, okay, this is me, can kind of visualize themselves. So we'll talk about scoring and we'll talk about what you're trying to accomplish. And hopefully we can paint a picture on tonight's episode that will carry us into the next episode, which will be on approach shots, and then the following episode or two on short game, either one or two. Haven't decided yet. So on tonight's episode, this is really discussing tee shots on par 4s and 5s. Yeah. I want to make that clear first because this is like
we'll lump the par 3 tee shot strategy into approach play.
Yeah, I think that's a prudent thing for us to do for sure because it's more of an approach shot. So this is tee shot strategy, like hitting a driver or deciding whether or not to hit a driver. But most of the time it's going to be driver. And so as we look at score value. So this is something that you introduced to us through GameForge to the listener early on, way back, maybe even in episode 1 or 2. Yep. We started talking about that each shot we hit has a score value sort of in the data set, okay? Yep. And your tee shot has a score value depending on the level of player that you are, what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And I think when we go to scoring strategy in golf, I want to go back to the story that I told last time about myself, and I think many, many golfers, which is for many years that I played golf, I had no strategy at all. I mean, I had a little bit of strategy, like, oh, don't hit it in the lake over there. Oh, how far is it to the creek that crosses the fairway? 240? Okay, I'm going to hit my 220 club on this one. That was strategy. That was kind of all I had, right? Yeah. Avoid big issues, try to aim away from the trouble. And that was scoring strategy. What we sort of tried to define on the last episode was this visual of, okay, if I'm going to have a certain skill set and I'm going to play that skill set out, let's call it 10 times on this shot that I'm about to hit, that we call that sort of outcome, that shotgun pattern of results of shots that we hit, we call that your dispersion pattern. And so as we look at playing a tee shot, we're trying to visualize us setting up on a tee and hitting through the framework here, hitting a tee shot 10 times and seeing how that dispersion fits into the hole that we're playing, for lack of a better term, right? The environment is the word we use, which one of my people that listens to the show hates it when we say environment, but I'm going to say it again, environment. Into the environment.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, he works in he's an environmental guy. So he's like, it reminds him of work when we said it.
Oh, gosh. Nice.
Yeah, so there you go. So into the environment that is the design and architecture of the hole.
Yep.
And trying to determine when I play 10 shots with my likely outcome dispersion, how does that play out? Where are those shots? And then what would I score from there? What would I be able to do with my approach shots from there, right? And then what's my potential outcome from all those 10 shots? And so as we're trying to play tee shots with this score value, a beginner golfer and a PGA Tour player's expected outcome from their tee shot 10 times on a hole is going to be very different. Is that not true, Rob Bales?
Yes, absolutely.
So when you started sort of picturing this for yourself as a player and then for your student, was it coaching first or playing first that this was a bigger deal for you?
Coaching first, absolutely, yeah.
Because
I'm actually, just recently, honestly, like in the last 5 or 6 months probably, really starting to delve into like what does it mean for me as a player, because I'm starting to play more, playing in some tournaments and whatnot. Like it's been really fun to try to apply it for myself. But no, absolutely from a coaching side first, for sure.
That's the fun thing about what we do is we're both the player and the coach, right? And we coach ourselves essentially. And I think that anytime I learn something new, I'm always trying to figure it out. I remember you and I having a conversation when the George Gankis swing came. Do you remember this? Like, you and I would text or call, and we're like, "What is this thing?" And you were like, "This isn't right." We're trying to figure it all out. And I remember trying to do that swing, for lack of a better term, from my understanding of it. I couldn't figure it out. Eventually, I kind of figured it out, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But it was so different than what I did. But for me, it was all about me trying to figure it out for me. Then, is there something valid for me to do in my coaching with players? Could I learn something that could help me be a better coach? And so I sort of put all that. Nothing has been bigger for me than understanding scoring strategy, both as a player and as a coach at the same time, basically, right? And it's interesting that you said really in the last 4 or 5 months for yourself that you've been thinking about. As I pointed out on the last episode, this is new. This is kind of a new approach to golf, right? Like this is a new understanding of what's going on within, say, 5 to 7 years probably that we've been really delving into the data for all levels of player and trying to figure this out. So today on this episode, I want you to visualize that, right? I am whatever level golfer that I am. I stand on a par 4 or a par 5 hole. I've got things in the environment, bunkers and rough and trees and hazards and fairway and width of fairway and wind and all this stuff. And I'm going to hit 10 balls and I'm going to see where they go. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to take you through the framework of what is it that I need to do to optimize my ability to shoot a good score while understanding who I am as a player and what my dispersion looks like, because dispersion is essentially the measurement of your skill. I mean, it's a measurement of your skill. It's your measurement of your ability to control the ball, which I've always said is the skill, is my ability to control and predict where the ball is going to go. And so when we put that into the context of play, I made this point last time, you and I made this point on the last episode, you can play better, you can score better tomorrow with the same skills if you understand strategy better. So that is today's episode with tee shots. And I'm excited about it. I'm present. I'm here. I'm focused. I'm ready to bring this to the listener today. How about you, Rob Fales? You ready to bring it?
I'm ready.
So now, the framework, right? Now we're going to go through what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So score value, it does change between level 1, level 2, level 3 player. And again, we sort of call level 4 PGA Tour or LPGA Tour, and we don't count them. They're too good. No, they're great. And really, this is where all this came from. I mean, it started with them, and now it's matriculating down to the amateur, this understanding. So score value, meaning what is basically the data weight of what I'm trying to hit with the shot, and how does it play into my ability to shoot a certain score? And so with a level 1, level 2, level 3 player, the shot value or the score value of their tee shot, how would you frame it out, and sort of describe it for the listener as the player that they are with the score that they're trying to shoot?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to tee shots, you want to start with what are the approach metrics that you're looking for and kind of working backwards, right? So you can think of your tee shots should allow you to hit your performance metrics in your approach play, right? It's pretty simple, right? So like for level 1 golfers, they're going to hit 4 greens around, right? So think about, we got 4 par 5s and usually 4 par 3s. They're typically going to be able to, I want to say luck into, but darn near luck into 4 greens usually. So when you think about level 1 golfers, what are they trying to reduce as much as possible? You've guessed it, disruptors and penalties, right? So situations where after your drive, you can't get your approach shot inside of 40-ish yards from the green, right? So if your drive for a level 1 golfer doesn't allow you to do that, right, that would be the scoring value of the shot. Does my drive allow me to hit my approach shot, on the green or inside 40 yards, or does it not? And that's pretty much it for level 1. Level 2 is now you're starting to really start to drive some greens and regs, so you're getting from probably in the 5 to 6 range all the way to 10, right? So your drive should allow you to hit those numbers. So again, we have 4 par 5s, let's say 4 par 3s. That means you're going to need a couple more opportunities on these par 4s where you can't dink a drive out there and then hit a layup and then have a wedge in, right? Or on your par 3s, you might get 1 or 2 par 3s where you're hitting a short iron where it's not just handed to you, right? You need to get your drive to a place on some of these par 4s to where you can have something less than, say, a 6 iron in to the green to have a chance to get to your green and reg number, right? While still reducing disruptors and penalties, right? So that takes you pretty much all the way to level 2, through level 2. And then level 3, the game changes, like we said before, trying to drive more in positions, which is going to be birdie putts inside 20 feet. So then again, does your driver or does your driving allow you to hit your in positions? And usually that's where fairways really start to come in, because for the level 3 golfer, they're going to perform well out of the rough for sure, relative to level 2 and level 1, but they're going to perform much better out of the fairway, and that's going to allow them to control launch, control spin, control dispersion to get the ball, to have enough opportunities to really get it inside 20 feet again on those par 4s, because they're going to get probably, if a level 3 golfer needs 7 or 8 in positions, they're going to probably get 3-ish on their par 5s, right? They might luck into 1 or 2 on their par 3s. So then, that's going to leave them another 3 that they need to find on these par 4s. And half of all in position, I might not get that stat right, but I want to say 130 yards is kind of like the 50-50 zone, to where like an in position is really kind of attainable. So how many par 4s are you actually hitting your drive inside 130 yards from? That would be kind of a meaningful stat in the fairway. And so this is where, again, we've talked about kind of what happens to the dispersion when you go from the fairway to the rough. Again, because these level 3 golfers are performing that much better from the fairway, going from the fairway to the rough is usually a 60 to 80 yard penalty when it comes to the size of the dispersion. So again, for level 3 golfers, do your fairways allow you to hit your in position number as well as your greens and reg number without incurring disruptors and penalties? So it's hard to say without knowing the approach play, is your driver doing the job or not? Without saying, okay, you need to be under this certain number of penalties and disruptors just off of the tee. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think some of the big considerations, and I'm gonna make generalizations here because we have to, right? We don't know who's exactly listening to this, but I think we can infer from our experience that the generalizations are going to be such. The longest hitters tend to be the best players, right? If there was one correlator to, if you had to try to find one correlator between good players and some metric, it would probably be club speed a lot of times, right? I think Sasha may have mentioned that. I think it might have been Sasha that mentioned that.
Yep.
It takes a level of athleticism and timing and speed and whatever to play really good golf, right? To the point of you were just making there. Level 1 player is probably the shortest hitter, right? Not always. A lot of times it's, I can't quite, I can hit 2 good shots and not get to the green because I don't quite have the speed, or if I get in the rough, I can't hit it long enough or whatever. And then the middle tends to be, in my opinion, is a very big mix. Level 2 is a very big mix of people. It could be like, good golfers that just sort of cap out, like they hit it straight and they're good. Their short game's kind of mediocre and they just kind of shoot 85 every time they play, and they're around that and they're really happy with that, which is a good score, by the way. Or you have some like young player learning golfer, men or women, depending on, what tees they're playing, they can hit it far, right? They can hit it long, but then they don't always hit it straight. So they're going to have more penalties and disruptors. They just don't control the ball as well, but they have the distance. And so it kind of gives us a picture of, I would say like level 2 is kind of the Wild West. It's a little bit harder to really pinpoint what that player looks like. Whereas level 1, level 3, we can kind of see those a little bit better. And so when you're looking at, trying to picture for a level 2 player trying to push towards level 1, hey, I got to get so many shots inside of 130, which makes a lot of sense. That's a men's number, I'm sure. Ladies coordinating number probably is around 90 or 100, I would think. Would make sense. Point being, if my driver is wild, right, and I'm trying to hit it further, or the hole is narrow, or there's water, or there's hazard, something, and I try to get down there inside where I should, maybe I can't control the driver well enough to do it. Now I'm giving up. Yeah. Like, this is the picture that we're trying to create, right? Like, for me to play that hole 10 times, the best opportunity might be for me to lay back some and play a longer club in where it's safer and I don't get more dispersed, right? And that's the kind of picture that we're trying to play out. Like, how do I gain strokes when I play this 10 times under a certain strategy, right? So that's the big, sort of score value picture I think we're trying to paint.
And that's where I would say also keep in mind that your tightest dispersion is the dispersion when you're swinging on time and on task. So if you are picking a strategy that you think you should use as opposed to the one that is like the one that feels right in your gut, right? Well, who knows what's going to happen to your strategy if you're making a very safe, steery, non-committed swing. Mm-hmm. So what we would always say is, and if you're like me and if you're like Eric, the math and the data and the science should give you that peace of mind to say, hey, no, this is the correct decision. This is the one that I can commit to because I know that the math is behind me.
Right.
So that's ultimately kind of where we like to be. But, you might get on a certain hole and you might have visual information that makes you feel uncomfortable. You might get a wind that makes you feel uncomfortable. Just might be a situation where you have these memories of having the ball in this certain lie with a certain club. You're like, man, I don't think I'm going to be able to make my best swing and my most committed motion in this certain environment. It's okay. It's okay. We want you to use the strategy that's going to give you your tightest dispersion, which is when you're on time and on task, not worried about trying to avoid hitting a bad shot. So I think that's a caveat that we want to make for sure.
Yeah, it goes back to the other stuff we learned from Dr. Pryor. It just goes right back there. Am I I would love to say I've got this decision process that I just play it out over and over and over. I'm a machine.
Right.
But we have emotion, and we do have thoughts.
Yep.
And then we have to go through the process of handling them. He called it the 5-step process. And I think at the end of the day, what you're saying is we have to have flexibility in our decision making, right? It'd be great if we went out and just, we went on and we're going to do this, by the way, on the Substack. We're going to do some visual of this. So we kind of put that out there last week. Where we're going to show you how to, a little bit more actionable way, visually, how we play this out. So I got this app or something, and I measure the fairway width, and I know all the hazards are, and I stand on the tee, and I'm like, this is 3 wood, this is 4 iron off the tee, this is driver at that, and then in the middle of the round, you're not feeling it, maybe. Maybe you've hit.
Right, exactly.
And so it's okay to be flexible. Like we've got, So that's, so we would love to be like a machine that just makes the same, but we also know we have to be flexible just because we're human. And that's okay too. So the data isn't perfect that way, but it's also the best we can do as humans. And so that's what we do. We just play it out over time. And to your point, I thought that was great. Like, if you're not on time and you're not on task,
who knows what's going to happen to your dispersion?
Your dispersion that you create on TrackMan in a controlled
it's
environment
not going to be the same dispersion.
ain't coming out. No, it's not.
Correct.
And so I thought that was a phenomenal point, Rob Fales. That's why we keep bringing you back on the show. I mean, these moments, unbelievable. So let's go through the framework. You think we're ready to do that? To kind of get into the middle of it and sort of talk about the shot process.
Yeah.
This is where we're trying to develop our intentions for both distance and direction, right? We're trying to figure out.
Correct.
And it kind of goes back and again. So just trying to picture with us a little bit. It goes back to us with our understanding of who we are and what our skill set is, with our score intention in mind. Now we've got to figure out some process for this tee shot, which is way simpler in a lot of ways than the approach shot, which we'll get into next time. Actually, way more simple.
Oh yeah. It's
infinitely more simple because there's a lot of variables that are taken out of the play here.
Correct. Yeah.
So, give us that process with the driver shot process, distance and direction intention mainly, and what are the key? You and I are going to discuss here back and forth a little bit. We're going to try to hit on what we think as coaches the main bullet points are for the different levels of golfer here in the shot process.
All right, so this is not something that, like I said, you should do, right? There is no should. But this is just my general preference in terms of how someone creates a shot, right? Their shot process. The first is going to be basically their carry distance intent, right? And with driver, you're also going to figure out, depending on the conditions, if it's really firm, really fast, or if it's really soft, right? What's the carry total that I'm going to basically be able to achieve here? And then obviously we want that to be as far down there as possible. And then taking any sort of environmental, I'm going to use the word environment again a lot in this podcast, but environmental adjustments. All right, so the adjustments being lie, slope, and wind in that order. Now, like you said, Eric, the cool thing about tee shots is that the lie is pretty much out. You don't have to worry about it because it's on a tee. Slope, you do need to account for slope in terms of the fact if the ball is landing below where you're at or above where you're at. So if it's playing shorter or playing longer, obviously if it's landing below where you're currently standing, right, it's going to play shorter, right? So the ball is going to go further than you expect. If your tee shot's landing on an uphill, right, it's going to play longer. The ball's going to carry shorter than you expect. So taking those environmental factors into account. So then once you have your club decision, whether it be driver, maybe you need to go to a 3-wood because there's a creek or something running across the fairway, or let's just say, hey, at your carry total distance from your driver, you can't fit your entire dispersion, which is what we're going to talk about here in a minute, in between penalty areas. And that's where you might need to lay back to be able to literally just fit your shot pattern in a place to where you can find it with a clear path to the green, right? So once you've made those adjustments, you're going to pick your tee shot club, and then you're going to find your direction information second, right? And just the same as distance, you're going to find kind of like the gross, right? So what is the direction I actually want the golf ball to land? And then based off of lie, slope, wind. Again, the lie, slope is kind of out of the equation. So based off the wind, right, where do I need to aim my shot in order to actually get it there? And then based off of that aim, I'm going to figure out, okay, how do I need to walk in and align myself to that aim and then swing? Right? So that's a very kind of stock process that I encourage with all my golfers. It's very rare that they deviate from that once they kind of get into a rhythm of it, because it makes sense to kind of like pick the club first, and then when you're standing over it, like when you're on the tee box, all you're worried about is basically direction stuff before you then get over it, and then wherever your attentional focus needs to be in your swing is what you're doing when you're actually swinging the golf club. But yeah, just the general framework I think is really helpful for golfers to understand. Let's get into the weeds a little bit about, right, what are the considerations in terms of picking the club, in terms of picking the direction, right, that you like to see with your golfers.
So let's give the listener kind of a visual on this, just a general, outside of level 1, 2, and 3. Let's give a visual on a tee shot and see, kind of give them a picture, and then we'll break it down level 1, 2, 3. So I think if you're listening to this and you're an amateur golfer, it's likely that you don't have a firm grasp on how wide of a dispersion your driver is. And that's totally fine and normal, by the way. So it's something that, though, you may want to start to create a little bit of a goal to try to figure that out. And there's ways that you can do that, right? Number one, take a lesson using TrackMan, and we can kind of work through that in a controlled environment, but at least you get a pretty good jumping off point. There's probably somewhere out there, I'm not sure if GameForge does it, based on how far you hit the ball and what your handicap is or scoring average is, there's probably a sort of a jumping off point that you could use.
There is, yep.
Okay, so where that is, I'm not aware, but Robbie will fill us in.
Yeah.
So where would is that a GameForge thing?
That's GameForge, yeah.
Okay, so we'll have to. We keep saying GameForge, people, GameForge, right? There's so much depth there, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's give it a jumping off point. I'm someone who hits my drive 250 yards, okay? I'm going to say I'm a decent player. I'm going to say the dispersion that I'm expecting on my driver is safe dispersion 60 yards right to left, something like that, right? So I'm on a tee shot. What are my considerations? What am I looking at, and how do I determine what it is that I'm gonna do? And I guess part of this too is, Robbie, it's not about that person saying I'm 60 yards and I aim straight down the middle of the fairway and it's 60 yards wide, because that's not really how it works either, right? So
right.
There's a geometric picture of your dispersion based on where you aim and then what happens. So let's talk through the general considerations of that player, and then maybe we'll kind of break it down for shorter hitters and longer hitters in level 1, 2, 3. So give me a little bit of a visual on what that player should be thinking about in the environment. We're going to use that. It's going to be a drinking game. Environment.
How many times can we say environment?
Environment.
Yeah. So the first thing you're going to want to figure out is, where are the penalty areas, right? Places where it's going to be a foreshore penalty or a disruptor. So that'd be like almost certainly pitching out sideways. And what you're going to try to figure out is, for your dispersion size, which, again, if you're taking a lesson, if you know on TrackMan, using finger dispersions and holding it up and visualizing that, where do you need to aim the center of your dispersion so that the furthest right ball in your dispersion and the furthest left ball in your dispersion are both in play with a clear path to the green without penalty, right? And that can be trees, that can be fescue, that can be a bunker that is impossible to advance toward the green from, right? So there's a lot of different types of penalties, as well as the actual red and the yellow stakes and out of bounds as well. So before we even look at fairways, it's where do we need to aim so that we can get the entire dispersion in a place to where we can hit anywhere in that zone and not incur a penalty. And then a lot of times from a distance standpoint, it's if it pinches in, if there are penalty areas that cut in to the fairway, okay, well, does laying back widen that zone? And if it does, that's probably a good idea. If it doesn't, then usually kind of tie goes to the driver in that sense, typically.
Yeah. And even the distance of the hole doesn't really matter in that sense, because
correct.
if it's a 450-yard hole and I hit a really good drive, I still have 200 yards in on a par 4, which can happen, right?
Yep.
Maybe, depending on the conditions or whatever. It still may make more sense if you were to play 10 shots and play all 10 of those balls to lay back where it's completely safe and then take a 3-wood into the green from 250, right? If you know that all of those have a chance to be safer. So you just get these are the balance points that we're trying to figure out. We can't answer all this for you on this podcast, but we're trying to give you the visual on how you picture.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times with a player, let's give them a visual of like a dispersion pattern, right? Like so maybe this player, when they aim it quote unquote straight, they miss 1 or 2, let's say 1, 30 yards left of where they're aiming. That's their big miss left. Then they hit another 1 out of 10 that's usually, on average, maybe 10 yards left. And then everything else is somewhere between straight and, 50 yards we'll call it 40 yards to the right of the center line. So then that person understanding that pattern, meaning I hit almost everything with a fade, and my biggest miss is way to the right, maybe 2 times out of 10, 1 time out of 10 to the left. And then I've got 7 out of 10 shots, maybe with the dispersion, it's only about 30 yards wide, right? Which could fit in most fairways. But if I'm going to hit 2 of them out of 10 into a penalty area, then I got to pick a new strategy, right? So these are the things that we start to picture and start to play out. And obviously it doesn't work perfectly every time, but at least you have a baseline for the strategy, right?
Yep.
As opposed to just being like, I just hit and hope, baby.
And like you said, and that was a great point too, is like knowing your dispersion is one thing, but knowing where you need to aim relative to your dispersion is maybe just as valuable, right? Because you might know that your dispersion is 65 yards wide, but if you believe that you need, like, let's say again, like you're on TrackMan, if your 70% of your shots are right of your aim and 30% shots are left, but you believe that you need to aim straight, you need to aim at the center of your dispersion every time, well then you might be putting the dispersion in a nice place from a targeting strategy standpoint, but you're not reaping the benefits because you're not aiming where you need to relative to where your dispersion actually is. So that's a great point as well. And that's something that in training and with the pro who's working with you on, I mean, that's a fantastic question to ask in a lesson. Like, hey, I'm not necessarily I'm obviously always looking to reduce my dispersion. Obviously, that's the name of the game. But it'd be an awesome question to ask a pro. Like, hey, can you just help me with where I need to aim to get the center of my dispersion where I'm trying to get it, right? And that's a great way to spend a lesson. It's just to figure that out, and that's that's immediate improvement as soon as you walk out on the golf course next time. Like, you don't have to get worse to get better. You just know, hey, I need to aim 1 finger left of my target. Boom, done. Yeah. Yep.
Huge benefit. So, the example that I give on this for me is number 5 at our West Hampton course at the Country Club. If you're a drawer of the golf, it's a long par 4, so you're going to hit driver on this tee.
Yeah.
It's got out of bounds left, a sloping right to left fairway, trees on the right, the 10th fairway's on the other side of this little grove of trees. It's not the forest; it's like a grove of trees, right? Not perfect. I mean, they're thick trees, but it's just rough underneath them. Cart path that runs in the middle of it. But if you're a drawer of the golf ball, as I am with the driver, even a little bit of a drawer of the golf ball, if you land the ball in the sort of second, third from the middle of the fairway, it likely goes out of bounds because it's going to bounce and bounce and bounce and roll on this right to left sloped fairway. And then it goes under these bushes where the out-of-bounds stakes are. So it can literally land 10 to 12 yards in the fairway with a draw, and sometimes more, and then bound and bound and bound and bound and roll out of bounds. So knowing that and understanding that tee shot, my targeting strategy on that hole is to aim it in the trees on the right. Okay? Yep. If I hit it straight, I'm in the trees. Okay? which I do sometimes, right? And you just hopefully get a bounce. If I go through the trees, I'm in the 10th fairway. It's no big deal. Really, I aim for the 10th fairway, essentially, right? That edge of the 10th fairway. If I go in the trees, I'm fine. If I pull it, I'm going to be in the fairway, which I do, 2 out of 10 or whatever. I'm in the fairway, totally fine, right? I just turn it over, it's in the fairway. But I cannot land it in the middle to the left side of the fairway, or it likely goes out of bounds. And you cannot, then you're hitting your third shot from the tee.
You can't afford that.
You can't hit it out of bounds, ever. So in a stroke play, well, in any play situation, match play, stroke play, like I've got to aim it basically in the 10th fairway.
Yeah.
And then just play on. That's what the hole dictates when I play it over and over and over and over and over again. That's just how I have to play it. Now, if I was a slicer of the ball or a fader of the ball, I think it'd probably be a different consideration, right? Because the shape of my ball flight would go in the opposite direction. So that's just an example, visual, right? So now let's kind of go a little bit. If I'm level one considerations, likely again we hit the ball a little shorter in level one. That's just true. Or I could be a beginner golfer that hits it all over the place. Okay, I have a level one golfer that I work with who's going to be really good. He's just a new golfer, big, strong, athletic guy. When he gets the driver in his hand, his dispersion is 140 yards right to left, probably. Okay, because he can pull hook it and he can slice it and he hits it 280 yards, right?
Yeah.
And so his ability to control it at this point is lower, right? So if he's going out to shoot his best scores, we're hitting 4-iron off the tee or hybrid or something.
Yeah.
Most of the time, because you can't play that, and then we keep working on the skill, right? Which we'll get to in a second. But I just kind of wanted to give a visual on that shot process. Kind of backs him down. Now, another level one player that just doesn't hit it very far. What is their consideration there, Rob? What does someone who's just like, hey, I play the forward tees, I hit it 120 yards carry.
Yeah.
You know, and at par fours, I never get 2 and 2. Like, what is the consideration there on the shot?
Well, that's where it's likely their dispersion is not as wide right to left, and that's where if they can overperform from a fairway standpoint, then they might help themselves out by not being quite as far back relative, like from a strokes gain standpoint, relative to someone who hits it much further with a lower fairway percentage. Like, think about like Brian Gay back in the day. Like, he hit it relatively shorter than everyone else, but he was pretty high up actually in strokes gained because he just hit a ton of fairways. And so, like we've said in the past, when it comes to tour players and elite golfers, it's like an 80-yard penalty in dispersion when they miss the fairway. So by him just hitting all these fairways, he's effectively gaining yardage relative to the golfers who are having a lower fairway percentage. So that's where for those golfers, like, it's okay. Like, maybe it's about figuring out, okay, well, how do I really, really tighten this dispersion and get as many of my shots of my dispersion in the fairway as possible? Like, that's what I would probably try to build with that golfer, while, again, to your point, like, working on the skill of hitting it further, because as you hit it further, generally speaking, you more than make up for what you lose in a little bit of dispersion typically when you hit it further. So it wouldn't mean that golfer wouldn't need to try to hit further, as long as you can maintain a relatively similar dispersion pattern. Like, if you get much bigger dispersion as you hit it further, then you might not actually come out ahead, as we've said before. But yeah, that's where those golfers' fairways are really, really, really important.
No question. So the notion that that hitting it in the fairway is irrelevant is not true.
Correct. Especially
for that player. Number two, the ability to control the face and path and launch of the shot, geometrically speaking, allows them some more width a little bit, because they're not going to hit it as far offline, even when it's offline, right? As opposed to the guy I was talking about who's a beginner golfer with great club head speed, but hasn't gained all the awareness of the face all the time yet. So then he's hitting it right and left because the ball's just in the air. So it's just the angle is growing as it goes. So that's kind of the big ones there. I mean, I don't. They can actually potentially. There's some really competent level one golfers that can start to play some angles a little bit, where they don't have to go over bunkers on their next shot and stuff. And I think they play pretty proficient doing that, because they can tighten the dispersion so much because they don't hit it super far. So it just depends on who you are as a player and what you're trying to get out of that. So I think for level 3 player, I think we've kind of gone through that in the past. It's like they've got to set up the impositions 20 feet and in approach shots so many times per round. Otherwise, they're not gonna be able to shoot the score that they need. Yep. So you've got to be able to be good with the driver at the right moments, and then know that there are holes where driver is not going to be the right play because it just doesn't gain you enough. And so you can't have the penalties and disruptors as a level 3 player. And so you've got to manage that dispersion away from those, even if it means, hey, I got to lay back with an iron off the tee or something and give up 50 yards, but I can't hit it in that penalty. I can't hit it out of bounds on this hole. So I think those are probably the main considerations.
Totally, and it's understanding that you need 7 to 8 impositions. You don't need 18, right? So if there's a hole where you just know you're going to hit a long iron into, you're just like, all right, well, at this point, like it'd be great if I hit the green. It'd be awesome, but it's like, okay, well, what do I need to do to increase my P6 percentage on this particular hole, right? And so that's where that goes into. It's like, all right, well, I might be able to take this line off the tee to increase my greens and reg on this particular hole, but does that create a penalty rate to where I'm coming out, where I'm not coming out ahead, to where if I, took a little bit less quote unquote aggressive line, I might not have quite as high of an imposition percentage on this particular hole. All right, but I'm going to cut down the penalty rate, and I'm still going to be able to maybe hit a green here and there, and start to think about where I need to aim my dispersion on the approach shot to really increase my P6 percentage. So, no, you don't have to have an imposition on every hole, and then I think that's what a lot of the pros do. They just know, like, hey, this isn't an offensive hole, right? Mm-hmm. Let's try to create a situation to where I'm going to have the best opportunity for a P6 possible.
No doubt about it. And width plays a big foot. So there's a hole that we're getting ready to. It will be a no longer a hole at the country club anymore on our Tuckahoe Creek course, which is going to go under a big renovation with Andrew Green, the world's greatest architect right now. And the hole, it took me maybe a few times playing it before I realized it's a par 5 around a lake. Do you remember this hole, Robbie? Number 5 at Tuckahoe Creek. It's around a lake, and then there's to the right of the fairway. There's also, it's basically a hazard. It's like lost ball right off the cart path, and so it takes a couple times playing it before you realize, oh, I could hit driver, and if I pound it down there, I could potentially get to the green in 2. Like I can, even me, it's not a super long hitter. I can get there in 2 shots with but it's over water on the second shot too, so it's not really the smart play anyway. But the play there is like hybrid 5-iron pitching wedge 3-shot hole all the time, because there isn't the width. Like where you hit the driver it's probably only 45, 50 yards wide between the penalty areas.
Yeah.
Like you're going to hit it and lose that ball. And then the second shot, even if you do pound it down there, again, it goes over water. So it's not, it doesn't make any sense. So you play the safe shot, play a pitching wedge in from 120 yards on the third. And see, see what is. It's just too narrow to be a par 5, right? So Andrew Green has realized that too, and he's taken the hole's going away. It's not going to be there anymore, right? So there's going to be a different hole playing the opposite direction, par 4 rather than par 5, like totally different hole. So because of width, right? So that's where strategy comes into play. Eric, why are you hitting hybrid off this hole? Oh, because it's not wide enough for me to hit my driver. Well, I just hit my driver. But I mean, I'm a +2 handicap, and I'm going to hit driver into the stuff 3 out of 10 times. It's not worth the risk. The risk is not there. I can hit hybrid, 5-iron, pitching wedge. Probably 10 out of 10 times I'm not going in the hazard. Okay? Yep. Do I hit it in position more often? I don't know. But I'm not likely going to make a big score.
You're still giving yourself, you're still inside 130. You're still giving yourself a decent opportunity for an imposition for sure. That's the cool thing about par 5s, is that you do have some wiggle room with some of that stuff.
So that's how you sort of decide, what am I trying to do?
Yep.
That's it. That's the process, right? I mean, we kind of went through the shot process there. So now on to skill. Now we're on to the skill part of the framework. Driver skill is interesting, man, because I think it is
really can be bizarre.
fitting, it goes back to driver fitting. You know, I've been doing so much driver fitting recently, which is fun. But it goes back to that. I mean, is our equipment optimized for driving? What am I trying to accomplish with my driver? When you fit irons versus driver, it's also a very different consideration, right? Because we're trying to maximize carry and roll distance while not sacrificing accuracy, right? So I feel like when I'm fitting the skill of hitting a driver with a club, the equipment part of it, like I tell everyone, I say, look, I'm going to fit you for a club that minimizes your worst shots and also optimizes your best shots. Both. You know, you can do that in fitting. You can get there. Usually when people get a drive that doesn't work for them in fitting, it's because one or the other was the major consideration. Usually it's hey, sir, look, this one you hit that drive 280. You didn't anything else 280 today, you know, and then it was the one best shot.
Yeah.
They buy that driver without realizing what it does on the not so great shots, right? So there's one brand in particular that seems to exacerbate the mishit. I won't name names, but where the dispersion just seems way bigger with that brand than anybody else. And it's sort of a design concept for them. They want to have the fastest ball speeds and stuff, but they know they're going to be the least forgiving drivers. And so the dispersion is just way bigger. And so when people become dissatisfied with their driver from fitting, it's because of that. So I think it goes back into the skill part of it, which is, you know, I'm trying to optimize my distance. We know that, right? But at the end of the day, I also got to hit it straight. So there's two considerations there. So that's sort of the skill in driving, I think, kind of comes down to a couple things that are unique, because even the swing in driving is different, a little bit different with what we're trying to accomplish. So the low point control, as we start to kind of talk about the number one skill, the first part of that, is different. Is it not in the driver? We're trying to accomplish something way different. So to describe to the listener why low point is so much different on driver than it would be, say, on a 7-iron shot.
Yeah. Yeah, so talking about what we're trying to do, with driver, we have a low lofted club that, generally speaking, we're trying to launch pretty high with a low amount of spin, as a very, very general statement, right? So when you think about what that entails, we need the bottom of the swing arc happening a little bit prior to impact in general, with especially our level 1, level 2 golfers, so that the club head at impact is working up, which might give us a little bit better chance to have a little bit higher dynamic loft. So if you've got 10 degrees of loft on the driver, maybe you're presenting 12 to 14, but you're doing it in a way that's not increasing the spin loft a ton, right? So the spin loft is basically the difference between the direction the club is moving up and down and where the club is facing up and down at impact, right? So the loft versus the attack angle. Well, when you hit up on it, you increase the loft, but you do it in a way that keeps the difference between where the face is pointed and the direction the club is moving relatively the same or minimal, which is going to increase the energy transfer from the club to the ball. So now you get a higher launch with a faster ball speed, right? And the other thing that happens when you decrease spin loft is just in the difference between the lofted impact and the direction it's moving up and down, which is the attack angle. When you reduce that difference, the ball also spins less. So you get a higher launch, lower spin, and a faster ball speed when the club is working slightly up into impact without doing it in a way that's going to really, really increase the loft a ton, is generally a good place. Whereas, having the ball up on a tee affords you the ability to do that, right? You can have the ball up on a tee such that the club is reaching its lowest point actually above the level of the ground and then working its way up slightly when it's hitting the golf ball. Whereas when you got a 7-iron on the ground, you can hit up on it. I've seen it done, and Ping has actually shown that it's more common than we probably think. But it definitely reduces the margin of error from an arc height standpoint. You definitely need, with the ball on the ground, just to get the odds in your favor, having the bottom of the swing a little bit after impact on the target side of the ball is going to be advisable in general for iron shots. So that's the biggest difference, is where it is toward the target and away from the target, as well as the height of it, right? With driver, because the ball's on the tee, like I said earlier, bottom swing is going to be never really reaching the ground or the grass in general. Whereas with an iron and the ball on the ground, you're going to want some amount of the club interacting with the grass and or the ground, which is a little bit lower arc height for those shots.
So how this all interacts is fascinating, right? Because if the low point is behind the ball and the club is moving up, it's also wanting to move in. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit complex. So we essentially have to swing the arc direction a little bit more to the right than we would what we call swing direction. We typically move that swing direction more to the right of our target line than we would on a 7-iron. So that when it does change directions, it's not moving across and cutting across it. And this is where I can see some absolutely outrageous improvements with folks in their skill with driving in like minutes. If we can just get that sort of just tuned in where they can gain 40 or 50, like a normal hitter can gain 40 or 50 yards like this. Just by tuning in the right loft and then getting the arc, pointed in the right direction with a low point at the right place, and then boom, all of a sudden, ball is just jumping. So in as we talk about that in relationship to strategy, how does that backdoor into my scoring strategy, so to speak, the whole skill of driving, as it were, which isn't just low point, by the way. It's the face-to-path relationship, as we've talked about before, and also the speed, right? So as we talk about those three, and I'm not skipping over them, but like, how do we put that into, is it as simple as just saying I just need to get better at it and then my scoring strategy will improve because I just control the ball better? I mean, it kind of. Yeah,
there's a strategy behind managing skill as well that we talk about with a lot of our players, and it gets really tricky because this goes a little bit into some of the Dr. Pryor stuff and how our nature is to be in the doing mindset all the time and to try to fix and to try to always try to to control things that maybe we shouldn't be trying to control. So my rule of thumb, and I'm curious to get your thoughts as well, is we want to train skill in training, right? Which is essentially gaining reference points for where either side of the skill boundaries are, giving yourself reference points for how to manage it, because we really can't control these things. It's more of a managing that I like to say with golfers, and really it's giving yourself the tools in your toolbox to be able to make adaptations when you notice one of two things happening. So what I'll say is it needs to be a pattern. Right, so if it's only one or two, right, it's so tempting for our brain to try to fix after one or two of the same outcomes. But you never know. Like you're hitting how many shots to green? Let's say for a level 3 golfer, you're hitting 42 to 45 shots to green in a round. You never know. Those might have been the only two that you hit outside your dispersion right the entire day, and they just happen to happen back to back. Right, You don't know that. Right, we can't really predict the future as well as we might think we can. So once it becomes maybe 3 to 4, then that's a bit higher correlation to say, okay, well, there might actually be a pattern there. And it's not only that it's 3 or 4, it's 3 or 4 outside your dispersion pattern, and it's 3 to 4 outside your dispersion pattern where all 3 to 4, the general rhythm of those swings was within your framework, was within your boundary, right? Mm-hmm. Because, again, when we get off time, tension levels increase. Our ability to make the swing that is going to give us our dispersion pattern that we're training is going to get compromised. So we want to have some feedback absent of where the ball hits on the face, where the face is pointed, the speed of the club, absent of the skill stuff, to tell us, hey, was that generally a good rhythm of my golf swing or not? Because as the rhythm changes, the skills are going to change too much. So we want to say, okay, well, is it a pattern? Is it outside my dispersion? And do I know that the rhythm on those swings were all like I'd be pretty happy with the rhythm on all of those swings. If you're checking all three of those boxes, then you can go into kind of like your skill toolbox to try to make a little bit of adjustment. So like it's really simple. Like if the ball's going right, outside your dispersion, outside your dispersion, outside your dispersion, and on all those you're like, yeah, actually like rhythm felt pretty good. Like I definitely didn't feel like I was grabbing it. I was trying to, do anything that was really out of the ordinary. Then you would just say, okay, well, on these next few, I'm going to try to shift my intent to have the club face a little bit more closed relative to the path when it hits the ball. Or maybe let's say it's hitting off the heel and that's why it's out your dispersion, right? Say, okay, well, let's make my intention to have the impact spot a little bit more out towards the toe, right? Just something really as simple as that. In the course of a round, to try to get the ball from outside your dispersion to now inside your dispersion. That would be kind of like first line of defense for me, and kind of in my coaching. But curious to get your thoughts as well.
No, I completely agree, because that's where acceptance comes into play. A lot of that stuff too comes into play in the warm up or in the days leading up to the round of golf, right? Like you may start to see some things creep into the game, and then it's like, oh, in my warm up I'm missing big to the right or big to the left, and that's different. It's bigger, it's different, it's more often. It's like, or I got this two-way thing going on, like. That's where you, hopefully in the warm-up, if you're well-equipped and you understand your skills, which we've talked about ad nauseum, low point, face-to-path, and speed control, like these are the things that are making the ball go where it goes, generally speaking, and then you should have a toolbox to work through that, like you said. This probably is showing up in the warm-up. If it's not, then something weird's going on. To your point, it's tension level. It's being off time. It's something that's, right? Yeah. So if it's just pure golf skill, it's not surprising when it happens on the first tee, or it's not first two tee shots. And then, so to your point, I like that. It's, remember, golfer, it's outside the dispersion, which is an acceptance of, like, if you don't understand where that is, that's your jumping off point for this episode. Like, I got to start to figure this stuff out. And then it's like, okay, now I'm on the third hole and now I'm on the fourth hole and I've pull hooked 3 drives in a row. Like that can happen. Like it can happen. Okay, what do I need to do? So probably my biggest mentor in this game, Rob McNamara, phenomenal teacher and player, out of Kentucky originally, played at LSU with David Thompson, then was a great teacher in Charlottesville where you're working at Farmington. And he said, he would hit it so straight. Like he was a very accomplished winner in golf tournaments, right? Big time winner. And he would hit it so straight. It was crazy, especially with the driver. And he said, somebody asked me one time how I hit it so straight. And I said, well, when I'm warming up, if I'm hooking it, I just try to fade it. And if I'm fading it, I just try to hook it all day.
Yep.
And so
there's genius in that.
Yeah, he had a toolbox, right? He was working off a toolbox, mostly influenced by his face angle, likely, right? He was going to hit it solid. He hit the ball good, right? So then his toolbox was probably just adjusting the face somehow. Yep. And he just figured it out. So point being, I asked you that question because I wanted to hear that answer. I think it's like, this is not something that we're constantly adjusting every swing, every hole.
No,
This is, I got a dispersion. I have acceptance of it. When it starts to get outside of that, I got to have a toolbox. I got to have a way to kind of, if it's not me being off time, because I've got to process a 5-step process for that now. If it literally is just swing skill, I got to try to get back into it somehow. And I have ways I go about that. I'm sure you have ways that you go about that. Everybody should develop that on their own. That should be something that they're developing. Anything else you wanted to talk about in the skill part of this situation, Rob?
No, thanks for that question. That was awesome.
I think it was a cool way to tie it together.
Yeah.
And so now it gets to the swing, right? This is the last part of the framework, swing. So tell us about the swing. What is the tee shot swing all about, Rob Fales, in your estimation?
Yeah, so starting with, like, what are the options, right? We have energy, time, and geometry, right? Those are kind of the main 3, right? So energy and time, you can think of, that's how we're organizing, and I just use the word rhythm, right? When I'm talking about energy and time together, that would be a characteristic of rhythm, right? So everyone's going to have their own rhythm where they perform best. Based off the research, we can say that it's likely with driver going to be somewhere in the neighborhood, if we're using time as a reference, which is kind of my favorite way to use kind of a feedback loop for rhythm, relative to the ball, it's going to be between 2.5 to 3.5 to 1. Backswing time relative to downswing time. But if we actually use kind of backswing time relative to entire downswing and follow-through time, it's going to be 1-to-1-ish. The amount of time...
So say that again, from the time you start to move the club to the top of the backswing.
So backswing time, so total backswing time relative to entire downswing and follow-through time is going to be relatively matched.
Okay.
So if you're saying a 3-syllable word to end of backswing, that same 3-syllable word is going to get you from the start of the club change direction all the way to the club is stopped in the follow-through. So you could say like Virginia, and the swing's done, right? That would be a slower tempo. You could use Birdwood for a 2-syllable.
This is club change of direction, not lower body change of direction.
Club.
Okay.
Club head. Yeah, I use club head, right? So the amount of time the club is swinging in the backswing direction versus entire downswing into follow through, right? So you're tying in the club to the sound, right? And then a faster tempo, right? So tempo is just the difference in speed, would be more of like a 1-syllable. So when you think about 1-syllable, 2-syllable, 3-syllable, that's kind of like a nice range of tempos, amounts of swing time that we tend to see on tour. And what we tend to see is, again, 2.5 to 3.5 to 1. That's going to get you basically matched, more or less, backswing time and then entire downswing into follow-through time.
Can you give us a visual on some players that we would know?
Yeah. So like John Rahm would be like probably not even a 1-syllable.
Which is perfect because he's like John Rahm.
Yeah,
right,
John
right.
Rahm.
Like
right.
Nick Price would have been another one. Nick Price, right?
Yeah.
Like just, okay.
Yeah, Jake Knapp would be a pretty classic 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Ludwig, kind of a 2.
Mm-hmm.
Scotty's kind of like a 2.5, maybe almost 3. And then you got guys who, again, are more on the like the 3.5 end of the spectrum. So like Xander's probably more 3.5 to 1. So is it perfectly matched? And that's fine. It's just his rhythm, right? He should be able to feel, absent of the strike, absent of the ball flight, right? Was that swing in rhythm or not, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm a huge fan of having a way to create feedback on, okay, was the general rhythm of your swing the same or not? Because when you think about all of the different geometry stuff, right? So we have energy, time, geometry. A lot of the geometry stuff is shot dependent. Ball below your feet, ball above your feet, downhill lie, uphill lie, based off of the shot intent that you have. If you're going to hit more of a fade or a draw, higher, lower, different grip styles, there's a lot of different geometry that can work. But what we find is that the more consistent the rhythm is, the tighter the dispersion and skill, which is going to lead to the golfer being more predictable. So what we say is like, we just don't want the rhythm changing. Like, just pick one, right? Yeah. Because if you pick one, you can self-organize around it.
Yeah.
And know how to change speed without changing rhythm. Like, that's the big thing, is like people go from like partial shot to full shot and they'll change the rhythm, right? Well, no, it doesn't really matter. You can go Virginia, and hit a 10-foot putt. You can also go Virginia, and hit a 300-yard drive. It doesn't matter. It's just the amount of energy, but the way that the energy is organized in time is going to create a very, very, very kind of consistent rhythm. That's like the golfer's fingerprint. Like if you look at Scotty, like his in Tiger and like all the best players in the world, like if you just put them on their own like time clock, like they're always going to be extremely, extremely, extremely consistent within what they do from like a time standpoint.
Oh yeah.
But now they're changing energy depending on the shot, but they're not doing it by changing rhythm. So what we see, right, changing energy by changing rhythm would be like a golfer making basically like the same backswing every time and then just like adding force coming down or taking force away coming down to hit different length putts, right? So like I'm going to accelerate to hit the ball harder. I'm going to decelerate to hit it shorter. Like that's oversimplified and probably not the right terms, but like that's the general picture that we want to create for people. It's like, can we keep the general blueprint, the fingerprint, very, very consistent, and then change the amount of momentum, really, honestly, in that first little bit in the backswing to create a different swing size and swing speed. So, like for your longer shots, it's going to be a longer swing, but it's also a faster swing, right? For your shorter shots, it's going to be a shorter swing, and it's also a slower swing. So shorter and slower is the same amount of time as longer and faster, right? So they're organizing together in a very, very predictable way.
And I think as far as scoring strategy goes, the importance of this, both from an energy time and what you call geometry standpoint, which we didn't delve deep into what that meant, but
like position, like what you can see on camera, like
correct, and your adaptability to different, environmental situations, which we did, which in the tee shot is not tremendous, right? Because usually it's
right.
But the point being, when it comes to strategy, it seems to me that our control over these allow us to more likely predict the dispersion that we're going to put out there time and time again. Our skill sets. So we say dispersion skills, shots, whatever you want to call it. Like my ability to produce these swings in the moment, in a controlled way and in an understandable way, allows me to have a good decision-making process and predictability of what my dispersion should be, and then put it into the context of the environment and the design of the hole, just like we said we would want to, because that's where, if I can do that, it's all great. It's like they said, it's like, isn't it Mike Tyson that said everybody has a great game plan until they get punched in the face?
Yeah.
Right? That's where this comes into play. It's great to have a game plan, but on the first tee you get punched in the face, and then you've got to figure out how to do it. And so can you stick to it? Can you stick to it over and over and over again by tying it together with the swing, produce the way that you're discussing here? Yep. And I think that's to me, that's the key. Yeah. So as you're looking at, and as you're looking at level 1, 2, and 3, I don't know that there's a big distinction here, right? Like level 3 players obviously understand this and feel it and have trained it better. Maybe level 1 players may have that same control. They just don't hit it as far. And so their scoring is higher, right? Like, cause they just don't get to the green as quickly. Level 2 is probably where this is most erratic. Again, I'm making generalizations, but where this could be all over the place, adaptability to slope and all that type of stuff. But as far as tee shot goes, it's like, can I get out there? Hey, guess what? This is a par 5 hole. Like, yes, really good players probably have a couple of different ways they swing the driver. I know I do. I probably have 3 or 4 total shots I hit with my driver, but one of them I play most of the time. Yeah. Right. Sometimes I've got a high cut that I can hit. I hit generally a medium draw, right? Then I can hit what I call like that's my fairway finder. And then I've got like hey, this is just a wide open par 5 and I'm going to just try to rip this thing. Like I typically have that speed. I don't know if I have it right now, but that's what good players do. They have a few different shots that they can hit, right? I don't hit a slinging draw with my driver very well. I can cut it way easier. Little draw for my stock shot, and then I just swing hard at the, I don't really care if it draws or fades. I just swing it as hard as I can. So that's the swing, but can I produce it in the moment and hit it inside the dispersion, right? Is what we're after.
And so that's that comes back to being on time and on task, because that is the biggest thing that disrupts rhythm, honestly, is when we're off time. The rhythm is honestly the first thing to go, and then hopefully the skills line up. But if your rhythm's changing, then the odds are not good from a skill standpoint of what you're going to get. So that's why we say, like, we don't love using the word consistency, but if there is anything that's going to be consistent swing-wise, it's going to be general rhythm, so that you can be predictably inconsistent with the skills to create the desired outcome of the golf ball relative to the shot that you're creating, or that relative to the shot that you want. Because this will really get in depth with approach play, not so much as driver, because driver really the skills can probably be a little bit more consistent too. But when you get into approach play, especially, like, you get all these different lies, slopes, like, you have to adapt skills every single shot, right? They've got to be different every shot to get the outcome that you want. So you do not want the consistency to be in the skill stuff. You actually want it to be more adaptability and predictability, right, to create the outcomes that you want. We want the consistency in the general rhythm so that we can make those very, very, very kind of like slight adaptations to some of the skill stuff.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So, is there anything else you want to add in the swing part?
I don't think so.
Felt like we covered that pretty deeply. So, going back and summarizing what we discussed today, if I were a listener and knowing that we've listened to us for a while and we talk about processes, right? This was a process-based discussion today, obviously, right? So this is a strategic process that you go through with some offshoots of other things that you can consider, right? So I'm going to try to kind of summarize that a little bit for the listener here at the end. So number one, tee shots are really about not you hitting, like, this drives me nuts. I'll give you a picture. Like when you play with a caddy sometimes and the caddy's like, oh, hit it right over the corner of that bunker. That drives me crazy. I can't play golf like that. Like if it's 2 holes of that, I'm done. I'm like, I'll just figure it out from here because I can't. That's just not how I play golf, right? So you've got to start to learn that your tee shot skill is this acceptance of when I hit a ball, it's going to do this thing on 10 or 100 or whatever you want to say it, right? And then I've got to learn, I got to learn what that is. B, I got to learn to do it consistently in the moment with the stuff we just talked about, right? Like the rhythm, being present, being on time, having my skills sort of figured out, where I can adjust if I need to make slight adjustments in round, going through a good process of that. So once I've got that figured out, then I've got to figure out, based on the design of the hole or the environment or whatever we want to call it, where I need to aim the center of that, okay? Then I got to align myself to that, and I got to execute a golf shot, right? Yep. I got to have acceptance with the outcome, and then I got to move on to my next one, right? Hopefully without trying to fix too quickly. Rule of thumb from Rob Fales. You're not going to fix one shot that doesn't seem to be straight. B, it's got to be outside the dispersion. And C, it's got to be more than probably 2 in a row outside the dispersion before we start trying to do any quote-unquote adjustment. I'm not even going to call it fixing. I'm going to call it adjustment to the skill. Right? And
it's got to be if you knew that the rhythm was pretty much, like, you're hitting your times from a rhythm standpoint too. Because, like, if the rhythm's changing, then, like, the skills, like, they get thrown out the door. Like, who knows what's going to happen.
Perfect point. I hit one like that. I played a few weeks ago at Farmington. I had one really weird drive where it just, brain was not, probably wasn't present. Like I was playing well, and then I just made this swing that as soon as I was halfway through the downswing, I'm like, what is going on right now?
This isn't
right?
me. Right.
Straight up pull hook, hit, whatever. Yeah. So that was not something I was going to be trying to quote unquote fix on the next one. No, I'm going to try to just do my better swing that I was doing all day.
Like it was a skill issue, but it really wasn't like a skill issue. It was like you were off time.
Right. It was influenced by being
the swing
mentally.
Didn't know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. I was believing my own hype, I think was the moment. I think that was what was happening.
Yeah.
And so I just wasn't focused on the shot. It was a crazy drive, but it was the only one like that all day. And I don't think about it. It doesn't bother me. Right. And so the action step to me would be, if you don't know your dispersion, try to get an understanding of that. B, if your driver isn't optimized for you, you should probably test some drivers, get a lesson, get a club fitting with someone you trust. I personally think you should get it with your coach. If you have a coach, like they should be the one looking at your driver to determine that. Because again, I just think you've got to understand the full picture, right? Sometimes a very good club fitter is just, they're good at what they're doing, but they're not coaches. They're club fitters.
Correct.
So there's a different story there. So it takes a little bit out of context. Although the club fitters do great, so I'm not being critical of them. But if you have a coach, you should be fit with your coach, in my opinion.
Yes.
And so that's kind of the idea with tee shots, right? We're gonna try to play it out where we know I can fit it into that area safely, avoid the penalties, disruptors for the scores I'm trying to shoot. Better players need to be considering trying to hit it closer with their approach shots more often, and what considerations are there. Worse players generally are trying to get it in the fairway more often, so they have a little bit more control in the next one and avoid big penalty shots. That's the way it is. Play those shots out over and over and over again. That's going to give you your tee shot strategy. It's going to fit beautifully into your approach shot strategy, which we will discuss on the next episode of the Golf Intervention Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Is there anything else you wanted to close with tonight, Coach Rob?
I think we hit on it.
That was fun. You and I, we were able to bring it together tonight, get focused, be present. We both had some big things going on. Took my son to college. It was his first time away at college. That was tough. See, I'm wearing my Virginia sweatshirt today. So we're going to go to the football game. We'll see him on Saturday. But, it's tough. It's tough sending your kids away, man. That's it's a weird feeling. And so, you sort of deal with those emotions for a week or two and getting it back together. So I wasn't as present, but we had our notes. We were ready to go. And we pulled it together.
We did.
And so anyway, thank you. If you could write a rating and sort of give us a 5-star on either Spotify or Apple, we'd love if you would do that. If you want to get the bonus exclusive content, it is thegolfintervention.substack.com, and we are going to do probably one big bonus episode for this series, and we're going to support it with some other little articles and graphics and things that we've been working on. So it'd be a good time to upgrade to that exclusive subscriber on Substack, because we are going to do some visual stuff on the scoring strategy, which is going to be really cool with some dispersion overlays and aim lines and talk about all kinds of different stuff. That's going to be really fun, very visual. So check that out. Not out yet, by the way, but that will be coming. We're working on it. So within the next few weeks, in the time frame of this series. So as we wrap tonight, I want to thank you, the listener. We appreciate the feedback that we're getting and that you tune in with us. It's humbling to know that we're helping you, which is our one and only goal that we've always had, is just to help the golfer understand the process of improvement, which is what it's really all about. If you understand the process, you can get there. And we're hoping to clear that up for people. That's all we're after.
That's it.
Hopefully we're on the right track. Give us some feedback. You can email us at thegolfintervention@gmail.com or contact us on the Substack. There's a free subscription there, and you can text us on our show notes. If you look in the show notes, you'll see that. So in the show notes, check it out. There'll be links to the Substack, all kinds of fun stuff. So if you haven't been checking out the show notes, check it out. And that's all I got for this evening. That's going to be a long episode, and that's okay. This is a big one. This is meaty.
It is.
It's good. All right, listener, thank you very much. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next time.
Cheers.